You have no idea what kind of a challenge it is for me to make a video with the recording how not to kill your wife and kids during quarantine, as opposed to what everyone else is putting out on Facebook and during the content, which is how to maximize and how to elevate, and what a great opportunity for all of us to sit there. And it's like, okay, great, for those kinds of people, fantastic, keep doing what you're doing. But what about for the rest of us? So first and foremost, let's kind of illustrate what the big challenge is, which is that we are put in a situation that most of us and most people in all of human history have never been put in. Right? We all have sort of spheres of influence around which we operate. We have methodologies and ways of communicating. And while we're in quote unquote quarantine, it's like we've taken on so many different roles of being around the kids all the time, right? That never happened to many of us before, right? To being around our spouse all the time, which we might not be used to. And unless you are a black belt in all of these things, you're going to expect to find problems. And you should expect it, because realizing, and just practically, I'm just going to bang through some of the basic psychological and marital advice type of A through Z very quickly. Step number one is that you have to put yourself in the right frame of mind, which means is you need to appreciate that what you're going through is going to be very, very difficult, and how you relate to people. The challenge is, how do I go through it the best that I can? So very often we have what we want, but when we put ourselves in proper context, what we have to appreciate is, what can we do? How do we reformat the game to be successful? And that takes time and that takes consideration, because if we wanted to have a great marriage, but the definition of a great marriage is that most of us, most of the day we're out of the house together, and, we can connect back and have that important, connection time at the end of the day, all that kind of stuff. So that's like great. But when you bounce back into the modern reality of where we are, that's kind of out the window. So the goal, first and foremost, I would ask, would be to appreciate sort of, what do I want to accomplish? And to flip it around, how could I be a good spouse? As opposed to saying, what could my spouse do for me? As John Kennedy says, perhaps we could turn around and say, what can I do for my spouse? So what does my spouse need at this time? That's a very practical first and most important point. So if you think to yourself, what kind of a spouse could I be? That's going to right away pop up a bunch of stuff. If you don't know, and if this is this is for the black belt people, if you don't know, you ask. That's, again, very high level. Say to your spouse, what do you need right now? But in general, you've been married to them for more than 5 seconds, or you have a heartbeat. You might know they don't want to be critiqued. They don't want to be yelled at. They don't want to be put upon. They don't want to be judged, right? So those are some great places to start. And maybe you can smile at them from time to time and make them a cup of coffee, or offer to make lunch, or offer to take the kids on a walk, or offer to take them on a walk, right? Pretty basic. So step number one is to ask yourself, what kind of a spouse should I be? I know that breaks a lot of paradigms for a lot of people, because most people think that marriage is supposed to be you sit back and get served, and maybe that would work. I so far haven't seen so many marriages that work that way. So the first step would be, what kind of a spouse does my spouse need, right, at this point? And you want to go even further, you might be able to ask, what kind of a parent do my children need? Right? So that might also be something that would be an important question to ask at this juncture. And, does that mean, and again, there's the ideal parent, there's the ideal spouse. You're not going to be that. No one's that, right? And maybe they are, and if you are, watch their videos instead, right? But for most cases, it's like, how can I just do the best that I have right now? So if you don't have the entire day to sit with them while they're doing their homework, because maybe you have more than one child, and maybe you have something called a job, maybe you have something else, right? So then you say, okay, I have 10 minutes. How can I do this well? How can I show up as the ideal parent for this 10 minutes? So you want to chunk down. First, you want to get very realistic about what you can do. You also want to get very practical about like chunking it down and making the game winnable, right? So step number one would have to be, what kind of a spouse what could you do for your spouse? How could you show up for your spouse? Again, 1A practically with that is, if you don't know, you could ask, right? That's difficult, obviously. The second point is, what kind of a parent do I want to be? And ask that question, because you really want to set up the format for yourself, because 9 times out of 10, the way that we approach all this stuff is reactionary. And reactionary is always the solution for losing, frankly. And if you are able to plan in advance and say to yourself, what could I do? What do I want to do? It's like the same thing. It's really health coaching and business coaching, all this kind of stuff. It's real basic. Start with just, what do I want to accomplish, right? How do I set up the barometer for myself and go out and do that, right? The second step would be, again, so you think to yourself, and again, you have to play kind of strategically here. If the goal is you don't want to make your spouse angry that you have a fight or anything like that, what you have to do at the second step would be, how do you put out what you need and make it needable, right? So the first step is, how can I show up? What can I do for my spouse? And the second thing is, what could my spouse do for me? And also, you want to make that very crystal clear and measurable, right? Again, and all of this stuff, this all breaks down because we don't have clarity around this. We oftentimes don't want to say it. So I've had all kinds of conversations with people, and it's like, she works, he works, and someone's, dropping the hammer and saying, well, I'm the breadwinner, and it's like, what? Like, when did that ever make sense, right? So the flip side would be, you have to think first and foremost to yourself, what can I do for my spouse? Secondly, you have to ask, what do I need from my spouse? And you have to be able to articulate it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very difficult thing that we don't like to do, mostly because most of the time we don't know what we want, and so we just kind of like to go around in our own milieu and kind of complain about stuff. And the second thing is that we expect our spouse to know, and especially if we expect our spouse to know, then we can get like angry at them if they're not doing it, right? But the reality is, unless we know and we articulate it and then we make it winnable for them, it makes it possible for them, and we say it in a nice way with no expectation of them doing it, that is the only way these things start to get across. So step number one, what can I do for my spouse? Step number two, what could my spouse do for me? Step number three, articulate that to your spouse, right? And ask your spouse, is that something you think you might be able to do? None of that is usually ever articulated. It's just this non-thinking, like banging into each other, getting upset with each other, etc. The third piece is checking in with yourself and asking what you need. Not what you need from your spouse, but what you need from yourself. And that's a huge point, because 9 times out of 10, what we think is going on is that the world is upside down, and the reality is that we are often upside down, especially in the coronavirus situation, right? So instead of your spouse being mean, your kids being terrible, maybe you just need a walk. Maybe you need to sleep a little bit more. Maybe you need to drink some more water, right? So if you find yourself upset, check in with yourself and see what you need. Those are 3 extremely practical steps to walking through this properly and to not bang your head against the wall. Because again, you're going to find, now I'll add a 4th piece, right? Stop watching all of these stupid things that make you feel bad, right? So if you're consuming content and all you're seeing is beautiful people and beautiful families and all of this inspirational nonsense, which it's not nonsense, it's like important, but like, come on, right? Like, how many people have the time to like do all the perfectly cut things in the backyard and all that kind of stuff? Like, it's not you, and we all know it. And so like, it's okay, right? So if you find yourself consistently upset by the kind of stuff that you see other people putting out there, turn it off. Turn it off. You don't need to watch it because it's not for you right now, right? That's a common thing I see across all of the different kinds of coaching arenas that I'm in, is when the information becomes anxiety provoking, it's time to turn it off because it's not talking to you. And you have to know yourself well enough to know whether or not you're feeling bad or inspired by the content you're watching. So that's the next piece. So so far, I'm going to review it. Why am I going to review it? Because the reality is that there's nothing new under the sun, and it's just a matter of integrating the stuff that you're hearing in order for you to be able to actually implement it. And that's a lot more important because, again, I give you 3,000 strategies and you walk away and do none of it. I don't really care. It's a waste of time, frankly, right? More than that, have a couple of strategies that you can just rehearse over and over again. Step number 1, what kind of a spouse can I be? Right? How can I show up for my spouse? Step number 2, articulate what you need from your spouse and ask for their buy-in. Honey, I'm gonna need, I have calls. I do all of my business on the phone. So I can tell my wife, honey, I need from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock uninterrupted. Is that possible? Very often I'll be told, it's possible, but not here, right? So you have to go out, right? So, okay, so I can go out, right? And then my wife could say, and I've already ascertained this at the beginning of the day, she could say, I need this time from this day. Okay, great, so I'll do that, right? So it's a conversation, not kind of expecting people to sort of know what you want and then busting them when you're upset because they didn't fulfill your needs. Step number 3 is checking in with yourself. What do you need? How can you orient your life to make you feel a little bit better? Maybe it's a walk, maybe it's a nap, maybe it's some water, maybe it's something else, right? Step number 4 is turn off content that is bothering you. Turn off content that is not inspiring you. There's a very thin line between inspiration and aggravation. Inspiration being overstimulated and feeling bad about yourself. You got to watch that line. A lot of times we like watching the stuff that bothers us because we're like angry at ourselves. That's deep. I'm not going to go into that now, but think about it. The final step for now in terms of these very practical ways not to kill your wife and kids or your husband and your kids during a quarantine, the fifth step would have to be the concept of it's funny, I totally forgot what it is. The 5th step would have to be the idea of, yeah, I think that's about good. Expectation, just getting that expectation out there and shrinking down the time that you need. Oh, that's a very important point. Is that the corona thing? The reason why so many people have anxiety. Oh, then I got the last point. The reason why corona is so difficult for so many people is it extends forever. We have no idea how long it's going to go, right? And that provokes a tremendous amount of anxiety in people. And so the thing is, just you want to chunk your days down. It's like we're going to be up for 12 hours. All I'm trying to do is to get to the next, and if 12 hours is too long, I'm just trying to get to the next hour, right? Or the next, I'm just trying to get to lunchtime, so to speak. So you chunk the days down, then it becomes much more manageable. The last thing is, the point that I didn't say is, don't tell your spouse what to do. Stop telling your spouse what to do. Don't do it, right? Because that is just going to be the explosion in the mind that's going to create all kinds of problems. So it's always easy to get out there, give everyone your advice. Nobody wants your advice. Nobody cares. I'm saying this for men. I'm saying this for women. You put something out there, again, and this is like rule like 1,000, the most important rule in coaching that every coach I talk to is crucial. You need to get buy-in from your client, even if they're paying you thousands and thousands of dollars to give you their advice. Each time you give advice, ask for buy-in. Do you mind if I give you this advice? Do you mind if I coach you? And now that is for someone who's paying. In my case, I'm getting paid to give them advice, right? Now, the flip side is your spouse is probably, hopefully, not paying you anything, right? They don't want your darn advice, and they're not going to listen. So if you're dumb enough to try to offer it to them, that was such strong words. I'm really sorry. But if you're ambitious enough to offer it, don't do it. And if you're going to do it, ask, do you mind if I give you advice in this area, right? And expect them, the answer should be no. So that's the most important point. I should have really looped that around to put that at the beginning because that's the most important lesson. But hopefully I have buy-in now that I gave you 5 things to do, right? Figure out how to be a good spouse. Figure out ask what you need from your spouse. Step number 3, we said, is figure out what you need from yourself. Step number 4 is turn off stuff that you think is inspiring you, but just is making you miserable. Because let's be honest, that's probably mostly stupid stuff out there. And step number 5, the most important thing is stop giving advice to your spouse. Stop giving advice to your kids. Stop trying to make them better people. You try to be a better person and see if people can follow you. And if you have that environment, again, I'm not saying it for your spouse. Your spouse will be fine. It's going to create so much aggravation and unnecessary frustration in the home that it's not going to be worth it. And that's it. That's the bottom line. And we are learning amazing skills. You have to reward yourself. You have to be so proud of yourself. You get through every single day. It's a great thing. And we are getting better and better every day. Thank you.